Hi. So I'm Julien. I'm coming from Switzerland, hence the mountains. Sorry, I don't have chocolate for all of you. I'm working for MSSP as a kind of security architect or security expert, part of a team doing applied research or technology scouting to know what would be the next stuff. I'm going to talk about iOS malware, but the name of the company sounds like one of the AV vendor, but I'm not related to AV vendor, so it's not to sell you a new product. InfoSec is close, but not in this building. And otherwise, I'm doing also CTF and stuff like that. So today's talk will be about iOS malware, but if we looked into the news, most of the time what we heard since 2010 is a lot of stuff about Android banking malware or information stealing software on Android. So you might say, okay, I've heard about a lot of them, so I've only picked a few there. But if we looked at iOS, you might say, okay, it's not even a problem. Because from last year Verizon DBIR report, they said that, paraphrasing Jay-Z, I got 99 problems, and mobile malware isn't even 1% of them. So what they basically said is, okay, but there is no mobile malware. And I highlighted something that is really hard to read. But what they said is all the suspicious activity related to iOS malware was in fact a false positive triggered on Android devices. So this is their point of view. I tend to think that they might have some kind of bias into the information that they had, because if you looked at all the companies working into their the report that they build every year, there is not that lot of company into Asia. There is a lot of European and US companies, but not in Asia. This is where actually most of the iOS malware are spread for the moment, so publicly. So it's more widespread than we might think. And the more at risk might be companies, especially the high-profile ones, where you might have some type of attacks. So if we looked, there are still some types of iOS malware that has been published or discovered through the year. The first one was in 2009. It was named iKey. The idea was actually kind of a ransomware, but what it did was lock your screen and change your password, so your passcode. And if you didn't pay $5, then it will not unlock your password. How it spread? It was a worm, and it spread by using the default SSH account on iOS 1, when there was the first jailbreak. So, and the problem is that once you're even on a 3G or LTE network of operators, most of the time, there is no segmentation between all the devices, and you can directly access one another's devices, provided that you know their IP address. This has been the problem, has been recently shown in the news, so last summer, when Charlie Miller did the talk on Jeep hacking, car hacking. I don't know if you've read the details, but what they did, they were able to actually access the LTE modem of the Jeep because they were on the same provider network. So iKey was scanning for open SSH port, then it's connected and using the root and Alpine credentials, and then that was it. Then there have been some other one in 2012 and 2014, but it was mostly some ad-related stuff and not that much, and it wasn't that much into the news. But starting in 2014, the end of 2014, we have seen a lot more of them, like unflowed wire locker, and then we had a big one named Xcode Ghost that was in 2015, and that one made a lot of noise because it was spreading through the modified version of Xcode. So in the news, depending on which website you're reading from, you would say that Xcode was used to spread malware, but in fact it was a pirated version of Xcode that was used to spread this malware. And what I found is that most of the time it's quite hard to differentiate what was possible using a jailbroken or a standard device. And that's why I made this presentation, is to try to make it more clear between the two worlds. And actually, most of the stuff discovered since 2015, so unflowed wire locker, they have been discovered or published at least by Palo Alto, and one of the researchers, Claude Xiao, is doing something great, is sharing all of the samples that they got to the community. So as I'm not directly related by my job into looking into malware, and I'm doing it at night, this is quite useful. It profits the community to share those binaries, so we can reverse them and learn from them. So just a quick recap on iOS security. The first thing that almost everyone is aware of is that the platform is quite closed compared to Android. It's not possible to self-sign your binary and push it into a device. So no, it's possible, but it's really new. It's something that you can do only from a few months, actually, nearly 1 year. But most of the time, you have those type of access. The first one is the App Store. Everybody knows about it. You buy or you get a free application from the App Store. It's downloaded, and then you have the binary. No, it's not the full binary. It's so there is a application, so sinning, and then you don't have all the binary for all the architecture that has been downloaded onto your phone now. Then you have deployment, which is called in-house. This is when you have enterprise developed application. So it's true, as a developer for an enterprise, you have to sign up for an enterprise developer account, which is a little bit more costly. You have to provide a specific number for the company, register into the US, so you can prove that you are actually a company. But it's not the hardest part. And then you sign it, and the idea is that you, by getting this certificate, you will say that I will only deploy it within my company. So usually it's not supposed to be deployed widespread. So this is something that you might have known from your own company if you have MDM and you're using iOS as a base devices for your employee. Then you might have some in-house developed application signed by an enterprise developer account. Then you have the jailbroken device, which is a third-party app store, but then you have to jailbreak your device, and actually it disables some of the protection from the system, and then it allows you to bring on unsigned code to the device. Then you have a fourth type of deployment, which is named ad hoc. Ad hoc is to do some debugging, because as a developer, if you only have your device, it's not that much, and you have even if iOS is less fragmented than Android, you have various versions of the OS, you have various versions of the phone, so you might want to check that it works for everyone, and also get feedbacks as a developer. So what you can do as an ad hoc is provide at most 100 email address or so Apple ID, and then you can deploy those your application onto those at most 100 people device. But there is a strong limitation. And then you have the new case since last summer, which is self-sign. So using Xcode 7, now what you can do is request a self-signing certificate, and then you need to assign, to really pair your device, not only pair like you can access it through iTunes, but you have to actually state that your device is now acting as a developer device, and then you are able to develop and sign your own application. You still have to have a Mac to do so, and use iPhone. So the jailbroken case is quite specific, because it can be used in the security industry as an advantage. I used to do pen testing, and especially mobile application reverse engineering, to check the security vulnerabilities and that everything was secure, either for the customer, for a custom build solution, or for a commercial solution that they want to use to assess the security. So it's quite useful, because if you don't have a jailbroken phone, you have a lot of limitation. For example, all the binaries coming from the App Store, they are encrypted using a light DRM, but it's quite enough that if you get the binary signed, encrypted, you cannot decrypt it by yourself. So if you have a jailbroken phone, it's quite easy. The packer is really simple. You set a breakpoint once the code has been decrypted. Then you run the binary. The system will decrypt your encrypted binary, and then you dump all the code from the memory. It's quite easy, and then you have the clear text binary. That's why it's quite useful in the security industry, but there is one drawback, one major drawback, is that it disables code signing validation. So for some people, it's a good point, because then you are able to get some free stuff out of other app store. You can install Tweak, you can install pirated copies of some application, which is bad. But also, there is a problem, because then you remove one of the core security principle that made the platform like Windows RT or iOS more secure compared to our laptops or desktop, because we really have to bring on signed code that can be run, and it's not something that is usually done on Windows or OS X boxes. I don't know if many of you have deployed AppLocker within their company, but from my experience, at least in Switzerland and France, there is not a lot of them. So it's something that whitelisting application is not something that people tend to do, because there is a lot of work that you have to do in the background to enable new version of the application and do some stuff. So that's really one of the core principles of iOS, or Windows RT was doing the same, and unfortunately it's been stopped. But those are core principles. So other than the code signing, Apple is also putting other type of limitation. One of them is the sandbox, which is named seatbelt. The idea is then every code coming from the App Store or any code running on the device has to be going through a sandbox environment. So it cannot do anything they want. So Android does that by using various user, and then is using the basic user segmentation based on any Linux, that if you don't have the rights for a specific folder owned by another user, you cannot access it. That's how they do the segmentation between all the application. Within iOS, it's different. You have seatbelt, and then you have like a firewall, which is in place for the syscall, or some specific function call. And if you don't have the correct privilege, you cannot call this API, you cannot call this syscall. It's as basic as that. And that's how they do the isolation for all the application. When you request an access, you have to bring it like part of your manifest. So you have to declare a specific file, which is an entitlement, and then you fill in all your entitlements. For example, if I want to access the calendar, I have to add the specific entitlement saying I want to access the calendar. And then Apple will review those entitlements, and there are some specific types that are disallowed into the App Store. So this is a basic check. If your application is requesting the entitlement to install another application, because it does exist, it will be rejected by the App Store. And this is something quite easy for them to perform as a check, because there is no obfuscation that you can do in this part, because it's a XML, so plist file, XML or binary XML file. So there's really no obfuscation that you can do at that time. So it is something that you can do. On top of that, the sandbox seatbelt is supposed to prevent you, as I said, to calling API that you don't have access to. But there are some limitations. Maybe you have seen in the news, like 2 weeks ago, I think, Stefan Esser, one researcher on iOS, he published an application for $2 something in order to check if your device was jailbroken or not, or if you had suspicious application running on your device. What he did to do that was to actually take advantage of holes into the sandbox to call some API that weren't supposed to be allowed. Like listing other processes is something that you're not supposed to be able to do on iOS if you don't have the specific entitlement, but still he find a flaw that if you call a specific API that is not well protected, then you will get access to this information. So if we look at malware, basically it gets to one root cause is people get infected. So most of the time for the iOS world or mobile world as a whole, it's to lure user into installing the application, the malicious application. So what the attacker will do is send a link or a message with a download link, and then the user will click on the link and it will install the application. I used this in a phishing campaign for a customer when I was doing pen test. And I developed a small application saying that in order to win a holiday paid by the company, you have to enter your AD credentials into the application. And then I had a 10% conversion rate of the people who downloaded the application and entered their AD, so Windows AD, Windows domain, credential into the application. Because I say that it was a game, and if you didn't enter your credential, we cannot check that you were part of the company, so you cannot enter the game to play it. So 10% is not that much, but still it shows that it proves that people are doing or installing this type of applications. You would say that mostly on Windows, what attackers are using is watering hole attacks, and they are exploiting vulnerabilities within the browser. It's something that is also possible on iOS, like on any OS. Since you have code, you have parsing code, then you have possible flaws. So it's not something to rule out. But remote code execution on iOS are quite expensive in the sense that, at least publicly, there are not a lot of them. And if we looked, OK, it's maybe also a PR stunt. But what Zerodium did is offer $1 million for a remote code execution on iOS. So it's a bit of a PR to get people talking about them. But it clearly showed that if there were so many remote code execution on iOS, it's not something that, that they will price so high. So there is quite the initial infection point for an attacker is not that easy if you don't go through the social engineering part. Then once you're onto the device, there is not that much public, but there is still a lot of vulnerability that allows you to evaluate, to elevate your privilege on the iOS using vulnerabilities within the kernel, within the module that is loaded by the kernel, or any privilege code. Otherwise, if you don't want to send a link, what has also been done, I've seen in the presentation at various conferences, at least it was in Asia, what did was some provider were attacked onto the DNS, and the attacker reroute the DNS traffic, and then they pushed their malware into the web page that was supposed to be loaded. So they injected the link that way. Otherwise, what I've seen also, what has been reported, it was in China as well, is moving with a fake inodb. So inodb is for LTE, so it's not possible to have a fake inodb in LTE, but it's possible in 3G. So in 3G, if you have a fake radio interface, there is no mutual authentication between the device and the radio interface. So what you can do, if I'm emitting a signal stronger than the one provided by any mobile telco, then the phone will connect to me. Then I'm not able to do the full connection so I'm able to do the full connection to the telco. And what I can do as well is also push the binary onto the traffic. So that's also one way that people got infected. Then you also have physical attack. One feature is called Mobile Device Framework. It's a feature from iOS. It's what allows you, when you plug your iOS device onto your Mac, PC, Linux, it's a framework, so a library that allows you to push application, to push files onto the device. It's built-in, but there are some unknown stuff. It allows you to install application, and it allows you to do some process listing and to do some stuff like installing application can be seen also as malicious. Because one idea would be, as an attacker, you compromise the host, so the desktop, and then once the desktop is compromised, once an iOS device is plugged in, you generate a piece of code that will push the malware onto the iOS device. That's one way to install it. But it's not working only as USB, it's also working through Wi-Fi. So once your iOS device is paired with your desktop or laptop, once they're on the same Wi-Fi network and has been paired before, then you are able as an attacker to push your code through the device. And last summer also at Black Hat, I guess there was a vulnerability in AirDrop that allows you, if you're within reach of the Bluetooth signal of an iOS device, then someone can send you an iOS application that will be installed automatically once you reboot your phone, because that was a flow within AirDrop, and you didn't even have to accept the incoming file. Then you have a third type, which is code injection. There's been an article by FireEye, I guess, onto that. For example, there is a library for iOS that is called GSPatch. And from JavaScript, you can call Objective-C methods. And what some developers are doing is to hot patch some application. They are using GSPatch, so they get from the web, they download piece of code, and then they hot patch their application, their binary. So this is something that can be seen as quite useful because then you will be able to patch your binary. But then if, for example, this is done in clear text, so not in SSL, and you do it from a Starbucks, then if an attacker intercepts your traffic, then he will be able to push his JavaScript code within your application. So this is an example with an application from, it's a defensive application from Zimperium. And what they did was develop a small application for Linux that will use actually this mobile device framework and will activate the installation proxy on the iOS device and will retrieve the list of all the installed application and then try to match the list of installed application against a blacklist of application bundle. But then, again, if we look back, I just said that there is a code signing validation. So even if as an attacker, I'm able to push code into a device, then I still have the code signing problem to bypass. On jailbroken devices, that's quite easily, because there is no code signing done anymore. But on a standard device, that's still a problem. So what I could do was sign my application as an ad hoc developer. But then I'm limited, because I can only target 100 people. And then I need their email account, so iOS information. There has been some attacks done using this, and you also needed your UDID. But now access to the UDID is blocked to application by Apple, so it's not something that's possible anymore. Really, if attackers are doing a really narrow and targeted attack, they might use this technique, but it's not widespread, at least at the moment. Another option is to use the enterprise developer certificate. Because if you have an application that is signed with such a certificate, then you are able to install onto any device. But even if you're not from this company, but still there is some limitation, or validation put in place by Apple. Up to iOS 8, a user once they download an application, they had to validate that they want to install an application, and then there was a second validation to be done the first time that you launch the application. So the first time that you run an application installed and signed with an enterprise developer certificate, it will ask you, are you sure that you want to run this application signed by, and then the name of the company. So then it's up to the user, but for those of you who are doing pen tests and social engineering tricks and stuff like that, or doing ITL desk during the holidays for the family, you know that people get tricked, and that's a fact. Now, since iOS 9, it's more complicated. Apple added a new step. So actually, if you install an application signed with an enterprise developer certificate, and the certificate has not been imported through your MDM solution, so your device is not controlled by a mobile device management solution, which pushed the developer certificate, then you have to go to the settings, search for the certificate, and actually enable it. So you have more steps to do, and that's their way to try to reduce this problem by making it needed more steps, so people won't do it. But still, if you offer them a free holiday, that's a problem. So if we looked for the code sign at an application, in this example, I used a sample which was part of the Y-Spector attack, which is named Dapian. If we looked at it using CodeSign, which is an application installed on iOS, on OS 10, sorry, we've seen that the authority is defined as iPhone distribution, and then I have the name of the company. So one hypothesis is that those companies which are taking part of the attack are not willing. What happens is apparently that the attackers are hacking into those companies, stealing their signing certificate, and then they are signing their malware with the enterprise certificate from this company, and then spreading to user. So this is something to take care if you're into information security for an end customer. Your signing certificate are part of your assets. Because if someone breaks into your, one of your developer accounts, and then he's able to download the signing certificate for the whole company, then he's able to develop a piece of code that will be trusted on all your iOS devices for the company, or even further. And then you have a media impact that you have to handle. But then we said that there has been in the news a malware called Ace Deceiver. This one was said as a malware bypassing Apple code signing mechanism. So say, okay, it's broken. Well, not exactly. What happens actually is that if you read into the original post made by a Palo Alto researcher, what is made actually is that the application had to be at least once published into one app store, because there are several app stores that you push your application into, Switzerland, UK, France, and then or China, and then you choose which app store you want your application to be part of. Then what they did, for example, as an attacker, say, okay, I will only publish my application into the Switzerland app store, and then I will only activate my malicious code when the IP address so I will make a callback to a web service, and if the web service is not sending me back a specific token, I will not activate the malicious code. So what you will do is using GeoIP and say, okay, if the device IP is not within Switzerland, I will not activate the malicious code. If, let's say, I want only to attack people in Switzerland. So what did the attacker was, since all the sandbox made by Apple are hosted into the US, what they did was, okay, if the IP address is coming from the US, and since we know that we're targeting only this country, so no, we will not send the token, and the malicious code won't be executed. And since Apple has too many applications to review each day, it's not possible to do that by hand. So either they do it automatically, or they can use the code analysis stuff. So it should be even easier for them today, because if, as a developer, you enable the code scening, what you will do is not push the compiled binary, but now from iOS 9, what you will do if you enable this code scening is actually only compile it to half the binary, which means that for LLVM, you will only get the LLVM intermediate language. And then the intermediate language is pushed to Apple. And then what they do with code signing, the idea is not to send you, as a user, all the binary for ARM v7, ARM v9, 64 bits, 32 bits. They will only compile you the specific binary for your device. And that's what they did. So they take only the intermediate representation and then compile the application for a specific piece of code. So for them, it should be easier. If you've seen the presentation before about static code analysis from LLVM IR, it should be easier to recreate the AST. And then from this AST, so the call tree of the application, then to see if a malicious application is called or if something malicious happens. But still, there is many ways to do obfuscation on iOS, especially since the language Objective-C is reflective. Then you can call application by using the name. And if you obfuscate the name and you get the token, so the key to deobfuscate the name of the function only on specific case, then you will not see that. And in the case of Ace Deceiver, what they did then was, on top of that, what they did, so their binary was pushed at least once by Apple. But then once Apple revoked those applications, so it was not anymore on any store. But still, the attacker had one of their binaries signed by Apple. So what they did was to use a flow within the installation when you install an application from your PC or Mac using iTunes. Because in this case, you are able to do a man-in-the-middle attack, and then you are able to bypass the check that once the application is installed, it's checked by Apple if the application is still valid or not. So in this case, they do the man-in-the-middle, And what they do was make the iOS device believe that the application is still valid for Apple. And that's how they push it to you. And the application is encrypted, but when you installed it from iTunes, you get the encryption key is part of the bundle. So they push you directly to the bundle. So that's one way to install it into a malicious, to install a malicious application to a device. Now, if we looked into the actions, the first thing we can do is look at the application deployed into the App Store, really to see what is possible on the App Store and what is possible outside of the App Store on jailbroken device or enterprise sign application. So in the case of App Store, for example, let's say you want to do audio recording. It's a classical case when you can scare really the C-level, because if you say that in one of your meetings you are able to catch what is said, then for them it's a big deal. So you have an API on the app, for any application on iOS, and from this API, what you can do is actually record the voice, so from the mic. Application like Shazam are doing it, but what you will see is that if you put the application in the background, it's still able to record the audio, but then the user will have a ribbon, a blue or green ribbon that will be highlighted, saying you that the application is recording audio in the background. So it's not that stealth for an attacker. So this one on the App Store, it's possible, but not that stealthy. Then you have the keylogging. Keylogging is also a big stuff, especially since iOS 8. iOS 8 broke the concept of the extension. So you can have extension for the browser, like for example, you have ad blocker that are using as an extension, and you also have keyboards like Swift. And then at the beginning, it was said that an extension is separated from the standard application. So there is no way for an extension to store file on disk, and there is no way for an extension to communicate with the internet. Because there is a big fear. Because if you install the, let's say, Swift keyboard, and you don't trust Swift, what do you do? Because they are providing the keyboard. So there is one stuff that is put in place by Apple. If you have something that is a password prompt, it will actually be the standard iOS keyboard that will be prompted. It's not the one that you installed. But the text input has to be marked as a password field by a developer. But there is also a problem, is that they say, okay, but it's too complicated. Let's say that the application would like to, the extension would like to access the internet, so it's able to send what you type, do some machine learning on it, and then do some text prediction to get you more words easier. And actually, that's what SwiftKey is doing, or other extension like it. So then, if you go into the settings and allow full access for an extension, then the extension is able to access the file system and access the internet. So now, everything that you type into this keyboard can be sent to the outside world. And actually, that's one of the tricks that use a hacking team in one of their tools for iOS. That's how they did it with a sign application. Then there is the private API. Okay, this has been in the news last year. More than 200 iOS applications, they are stealing information, they are using the private API. What is the private API? So actually, it's only stuff that has been forbidden by Apple. In the developer contract, they say you shouldn't call everything that is private. So it's symbols that are not directly published or that are not documented. But still, it should still be into the sandbox. So all of the calls to the private API should be blocked by the sandbox by default. But as I said before, there has been some flow into the sandbox, and now Apple needs to be getting around all those flow. To get access to a specific call, as I said, you need an entitlement. Like I explained before, you need to define, to say, okay, I request access to the calendar, I request access to the address book. There is a whole list that can be found on the new OS 10 book. The guy writing this book made a a whole list, and then you can see on a base system, base iOS system, which application is using which entitlement. This is validated by Apple and then enforced by Seatbelt. So private API does not mean that you can break out of the sandbox. It's not that simple. Still, there has been some flow, but it's not that easy. And there is also a problem, is that for Apple to detect if you're actually using private API or not is not that easy, because as I explained, if you said, okay, I will only call the private API if my device is located in UK, but I'm a user in Switzerland, then it won't work. Your code won't be called. So for Apple, it's not that easy to check. And there has been some flow into the mechanism, like I said, with Stefan Esser, so Ionic application that acted to list other applications, things like that. In this case, if we took one of the malware, also from Y-Spector, which is called NoIcon, if you check and to the right, that is asking, there is a right to install, browse, uninstall, and remove archive. So this application is basically able to install other applications. So this requires the Apple private mobile installed allowed SPI entitlements with the install and so on. Is something, if you try to put it into your application and push your application onto the App Store, this is a big no for Apple. This is something that they can detect and they will block your application. This is not complicated for them. But then there are other type of private API that don't need specific entitlements. If you want a list of the private API, you can use, there is a GitHub made by Nicolas Serio on a Swiss fellow who made a full list of all the private function. Or on a jailbroken device, what you can do is use the class dump DYLD and then dump all the classes on a jailbroken device, and then you, from that you can check for all the symbols within private stuff that are not published. If you want to call private API, it can be called either directly, it can be done through DLOpen, DLSim, if you developed it in C, and then otherwise use Objective-C. For example, if it's called directly, if you look into the import for a binary, you will see it directly, my code above. And then if you're using reflection, what you can do is, I'm using actually the string, and I'm building, like in Java, in Objective-C, you can use reflection, and then you're able to get a class from the name of the class, and then get a pointer to a method owned by a class by using its name as well. So in this case, I've put all the strings in clear text, but as an attacker, they can obfuscate those strings. So simple XOR or ROT13 or stuff like that. In the case of an in-house application, it's different because entitlement won't be checked by Apple since it's not going to the App Store. So if as an attacker, you are able to sign an application as enterprise developer certificate, then you put anything you want into your code, into your entitlements. And that's how they are able to make malware that are able to install other applications into the device, even if the device is not jailbroken. And then it allows you more possibilities. That's what was using by the Y-Spector attack, for example. They are able to access the IMSI and IMEI of the terminal. And that's why they said that the application are caught by getting private information about the user. Because if you know the IMSI and IMEI of a user, you have, it's pretty strong to identify someone. You can also install application and access other private information like the MAC address of the device. And if you get the MAC address, then you can also infer some stuff about the guy. Now there is also another type of malware, which is non-application based. Maybe if you're using iOS devices and you have mobile device management solution, you're pushing configuration profile onto your device. Most of the time is to configure the email access, is to configure the VPN, to install corporate certificate onto the devices. But as an attacker, it can also be seen or used another way. An attacker can use configuration profile to install a proxy and say to the iOS device, from now on, you go through this proxy. And also, it is able to install a new CA. So if you go, even if your application is using a SSL or TLS, if the CA is installed and the application is not performing a strong validation of the certificate, then is able to even get access to your SSL TLS communications. And then also you can install something, the certificate to deploy application later on. So this has also been seen in the wild. Now, quickly the protection and detection. So detection is not that easy as on standard endpoints like Windows and Mac, because the system there is less privilege, so the privileges are more strictly enforced, and you cannot develop something like on Windows. Most of the AV or Linux, they are running using a kernel module. But on iOS, you can come to Apple and say, okay, I've developed a kernel module to do an anti-malware solution. They won't say, okay. But yeah, we have the application whitelisting, so we don't need that. So basically, there is no way for someone at the moment to publish such a code. So that means that the AV runs at the same level as the malware. So this is a bit of a trouble. On the network side, this is even more complicated, because on standard devices, you might say, okay, I will use my IDS, my proxy logs, my anything that you have onto your network monitoring stuff onto your network. But the problem with mobile devices is that they're mobile. So they might connect from the conference, they might connect from the Starbucks. So there is a lot of points that you might not cover. So one idea will be to have an always-on VPN. There are some providers doing that. And then you route all of your traffic using the VPN through your IDS, but your IDS is published through the VPN. This is one way to do it, but then you have a problem with if it's a bring your own device, it also means that the user, everything they do will go through this VPN. But then you have also container, like GUID or other type of container, Sysmosoft. Then they are doing specific flow only for the application. They are setting the VPN only for applications. So if you want the IDS-like feature, I've looked, for example, but it comes back to 1 year ago. I looked into what was presented into emerging threat type of IDS alerts, the rule set that they provide for Suricata and Snort. But they have some mobile malware type of rules, but mostly they are only for Android. So there are not a lot or any of them for iOS. I may be wrong in that. And there are other stuff like Lookout, who is doing also threat intelligence into this area. Then what you can also do from an IDS is to detect non-corporate configuration profile. Because if one of your devices is accessing a configuration profile file into the internet, and this profile has not been provided by you, you should block it, at least if you control the egress point of the mobile device. What you can also do is to detect on the fly if an application is signed by an enterprise developer certificate. So any application downloaded to one of your device, at least same problem, it needs to be protected by your network monitoring solutions. If it's signed by another company, you block it. Because most of the time, there is no reason, except specific case, that one of your devices should be running an application signed by another company outside of the App Store. So this is one way to detect it. Then, if you have an MDM or MAM solution, what you can do using the MDM is to get a list of installed applications from the devices. So then you get the list of the installed application, you get the bundle name, and then you match the bundle name against the blacklist of names used by malware. But this is not, it's IOC on the chip, because you don't have access to the hashes, you don't have access to a lot of stuff, you only have the bundle name. So basically the application name, like com.facebook.something. So it's not that good. It's quite easy. It's something that you can quite easily change as an attacker. So that's one way to do it. If you're running it, if you want to check on your own device, you can connect it or pair it using a USB or Wi-Fi, and then you can install the tools named the iDevice installer or iDevice provision. And then from this tool on the command line, you're able to list all the applications installed into your iOS device. So that's one way to do it. From the iDevice provision command, you should be able also as well to get access to the configuration profile installed onto your device. but lately I've had some trouble to do it. I think it's now blocked by Apple, but I have to check this. I haven't got time to dig into that. If you want to take it to the forensic point of view, if you have access to the iOS device logs, and you get it through using open source tools, through the case that you can buy to get to do some forensic analysis on mobile devices, and then it's not something that we can see here, but you have two stuff to look for. It's install-d and Springboard. They are two of the processes or services that are making entry when you have a new application that is installed. For example, Springboard will say, is the last one, it said that installed application did change. So if you have this type of information, that at least that allows you to know that, okay, the guy got infected at that time. Then, if you have also access to a backup of those devices, you can infer stuff from, so let's say, side channels. Like, for example, the battery usage or the data usage. Because you have logs in form of SQL database onto the device. And in those databases, you have the battery usage, the data usage, and all other type of statistics that are already made by applications. So if suddenly you get access to a device that you think is compromised, and you have a battery usage for a specific application that you don't know about, this is something fishy, and that gives you hints to get. And then it also gives you the last executed information. So that's from the forensic point of view. But then there is a problem with the acquisition, because then if you want the binary, it's something more difficult. For example, if you get something from the App Store, it's encrypted. So before before iOS 9, if you made a backup of your iOS device using iTunes, you will get the binary for the application installed into the App Store. But now, since there is the app scening and all type of stuff, no, Apple is not providing the binary within the backup. It's not anymore there. But even it's App Store application, so they are encrypted. You cannot access the code. So even if a malware was from the App Store, you would not be able to access his code and to analyze it, except if you have a jailbroken device to begin with. But now there is a problem with enterprise signed application, because enterprise applications are not part of backups since the beginning. It's stated into the documentation from Apple. Application that you have developed in-house or distributed to your user with enterprise provisioning profile won't be backed up or transferred to the user computer. So there is a big problem, because if you want to do some forensic and analyze what is going on, if you don't have a jailbroken device that you infect and then you retrieve all the binary, all the information, but you have a user that got infected, then you have a big problem to be able to extract the binary to analyze it. Maybe what we could see in the future are scanning kiosks using USB. So when you're working into like you have with USB key, you have this type of kiosk where you plug in your USB key that you got at InfoSec, for example, and then it will run multiple malware on it, AV, sorry, and they try to detect malware. We might see the same stuff for iOS devices maybe in the future, or maybe an AV for workstation that will say, okay, we have a new feature. Now we're scanning your iOS devices as well. For Android, it's more complicated because then you have to have ADB enabled, and enabled ADB onto a non-developer device is not something that is recommended. Now, about the protection, the first one is quite easy. Update your devices, but then you will say, okay, we don't know if it's supported, if it will crash my device. And then you have the hardening. So what you can do as an end user on the hardening side are the best practices. So for example, disable airdrop is something that you can do using your MDM, forcing a 6-digit passcode at least. And one of the most important stuff could be to actually do some user training and tell them that if you install an application that is signed by another company, it shouldn't be installed into your application. You should stop the process and call the the IT help desk or the corporate security team as soon as possible. But then you're putting the work onto the user. Okay. As I said in the beginning, this is mostly, I've been able to reverse engineer those binaries because I got access to them. And since I'm not actually performing active research on this malware, looking for on websites for binaries and stuff like that, it's mainly due to this Palo Alto guy that I got access to them. So that's it.